Now we're operational. All right. So we have measures of central tendency. There's a there's a few that we use more than others, and then there's the ones that they don't quite fit in the category of central tendency, but there really isn't anywhere else for them to go, so we put them here. The most popular one is mean. After that is median. There is a place for mode. Range and mid-range are the weird ones. Right? Range is actually not a measure of central tendency, but it kind of goes hand in hand with mid-range, so we talk about it at the same time. All right? The mean is the average. We have some funky notation here, which people who love math might enjoy notation. People who hate math might hate it because of the notation. Right? So I'll try to keep it as simple as possible when I discuss that sort of thing, but it's relatively, in this course anyway, notation light. We don't go too crazy, but when we do talk about notation, it is very important. Right? So I don't use notation for the sake of using notation. So when it does happen, it's important. All right. So when we're talking about the mean, which is denoted with an X with a bar over it, which, fun fact, is called X bar. All right. As we get further in the course, you'll see that there are different types of means, but specifically we're talking about a sample mean versus a population mean. In this unit, we're living in the world of samples. All right. So I'll note that it's a sample mean, but it's not going to work too much against you right now if that's not something that you're overly familiar with. All right. In the second unit, you'll need to know the difference between sample and population mean. So we're going to work our way towards that. All right. So we have X bar equal to the sum, that's what this guy means, of all the X values overshot the Mac, divided by whatever the n value is. All right. So I'm going easy on the notation for summation. If you know anything about summation, it's very different from what I'm doing here, but this gets the job done. All right. So these are the collection of all X values and this is the number of values in this set. And that might seem like notation for the sake of notation. Because it's like, wait, all I'm doing is adding up all the values in a set and dividing by how many there are. Then why do I have to write that? I'm not saying you have to write that. I'm saying you need to know what that means because sometimes you'll be looking through a textbook, a worksheet, online resource, and you'll see that. And I don't want you to look at that and say, what the hell is this? This is something new and abstract, and we never learned this. Well, you did intuitively and now explicitly. All right, but practically speaking, it just means add these guys up. And divide by how many there are. And get a result. All right, so I don't know if you have a graphing calculator with you today, but you don't need a graphing calculator for this. Just a calculator on your phone or a scientific calculator. I don't know how many people like to try to do calculations in their heads, but in stats, in most cases, the numbers end up being so hideous that it's not always going to play out. But you can give it a look, give it a try. So, what do we get? 12 point. 36, 12.36, 12.4, 12, anything that rounds appropriately. We'll talk about particular rounding instructions down the line, but for now, we're just trying to get the gist of the idea. Right? And also, once everybody has the graphic calculator, which will hopefully be by next week, because that's when I'm going to start working with it in class, so you don't want to fall behind. You'll see that we're going to be able to get the most exact answer from the calculator, and then we'll decide on rounding from there. All right. That being said, if you have, I think it's not iOS devices. It's definitely Android phones, or any kind of phone that's not Apple related. If you download the Wabbit emulator, that's a TI-84 emulator that you can use on your phone, but obviously not during a test. Because I don't know, you're not using the rest of your phone on the test. That would be a problem. So the TI-84 emulator in, I think it's, I'm not up to something. Is it still called Android? That's still a thing? Android? Is there another one, Amazon? Is Amazon? Yeah, but like the devices. What is it? Amazon Marketplace? Okay, well, you get the idea. Not iPhone. Not iPhone. Because they're jerks. Because iPhone is terrible. No, because iPhone has basically everything, every graphing calculator that you can possibly imagine that gets as close to being one of these calculators without breaking any kind of copyright laws or anything like that. Because Apple seems to care about that. Really very aggravating. Like theft of intellectual property and stuff like that. So. But yeah, other companies don't seem to care as much. So when you get it on an Android device and open up the app, it'll be like you're looking at a graphing calculator. So that's kind of cool. But again, you can't use it on a test. But if you're trying to buy yourself time until a calculator comes in the mail, then that's not. I usually have 2 or 3 calculators that I bring with me, so I can definitely accommodate 2 or 3 people. The issue is that if 30 people need the calculator, then it's like, okay, now you gotta wait for somebody to finish the test. That's your problem. It's $4.99. Oh, that's. Oh, on Apple? Oh, so they have it, but it's not free. Oh. Well, I guess it's slightly better than not having it at all. But I wonder how much it would cost. So you're on Amazon, you're ordering a calculator, and it says it's going to come in like a week. It probably can't cost more than $4.99 to have expedited shipping. So now you're like risk reward kind of thing. All right, so there's something. The median, the middle value data set with numbers in ascending order. So this is the old school way of doing it. There's a newer school way of doing it, and then there's the newest school way of doing it. The newest school involves the graphic calculator, so we'll get to that next week. But if we put the data in order, in some cases that's not bad. In the first case, I mean, it's pretty easy to see what the smallest number is. Then the next smallest. Then I got a couple of 2s. And I got a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 6. Now, you could already see how impractical this would be. You got 1,000 data points. To first start off by having to put it in order, then count to the middle value. I wouldn't even get past the part where I'm putting it in order. That would just suck, right? So, but we're not there yet. So we'll deal with that when we cross. If you have 1,000 data points, you're not even using a graphing calculator. You're going to a computer at that point. Right? So what I do is I cross off the lowest with the highest, lowest with the highest, lowest with the highest, until I have either 1 or 2 values left over in the middle. The two times, yeah, because there's one here and one here. Okay, so we want to represent them all, whether they happen more than once or not. All right, so you have the 2 and the 3. It's just a question of, like, okay, so now what's the middle value? Well, the middle value has to be somewhere between 2 and 3. In this case, we assume it would be directly between 2 and 3. Right, so what we do is we take the 2 middle values, 2 and 3, and find the number that's directly in between them. You might not need to do the calculation in order to get that, if they're clean numbers. If they're decimals, maybe. But find the average of these 2 numbers. So we're looking at the mean of 2 and 3. All right, so that's 5 over 2. You can write it as 5 over 2 if you want, but decimal form also is okay. So the median would be 2.5. So in some cases, in order to find the median, you have to use the mean, which is kind of weird to think about, but it is the case. All right, a good way to check would be where you establish your median. So it's this area. It's right between 2 and 3. Just make sure you have an equal number of values to the left of this line and equal to the number of values to the right of that line. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 values to the left of the line, 1, 2, 3, 4 values to the right of the line. Okay, so it's got to be smack dab in the middle. If I had chosen the 2, if I said 2 is the median, well, I only have 3 values to the left of that, but I have 4 values to the right of that. That can't be the middle number. All right? It doesn't have equality on either side. All right? Now, if you do the same thing with D, because there's an odd number of values in the set, you'll get one number directly in the middle. That's the easier case. So in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 9, then 14, 24. So if you're counting to the middle, it's going to be 6. Ned. Lovely. Median equals 6. I use the crossing off technique because when I didn't know how to use this podium, I'd be up here using my finger to cover up numbers. I'd be like, all right, so cover up the one with the 24, and I'd realize, oh, you can't see anything I'm doing. So I cross it off. So, like I said, reordering is the big pain. In this case, in these two cases, not bad. But even 20 values, you throw in a couple of decimals, things start getting out of hand pretty quickly. So another technique, which admittedly isn't that much better, it's still a by hand approach, but it's slightly better than having to do it this way, would be to cancel the lowest number with the highest number in the raw set of data without reordering. So I would just look at this original data set, not reorder it. So keep it as is. What's his name again? The Yeller. Oh no, I love hearing him yell, especially when he curses. I just can't remember his name. Every now and then he comes over asking me for my ID to get into a door or make photocopies or something. But every time I teach in this room on a Saturday, which is like the last decade, he's down the hall and endless source of entertainment. But that's how he reminds people to pay attention in class. He just starts screaming at the top of his lungs. So I'm going to cross off, I'm going to go through my list, find the smallest number and the largest number, simultaneously cross them off. All right. So I have a 1 as the smallest. I have a 24 as the largest, so I'm going to go meh and meh. Then looking at the remaining numbers, find the smallest number and the largest number, 2 and 14, cross them off. Looking at the remaining numbers, smallest number, largest number, 3 and 9, meh, meh. Remaining numbers, 4 and 8, so meh and meh. And so the only number left over is 6, right? So it's a little bit of a time saver, but it won't be as much of a time saver as using the calculator. This will be I will justify the purchase of the calculator. Let's just put it that way. We're going to use it so much and to our advantage that you'll see why you have it. All right, it's not one of those where you got the calculator, you barely use this thing. It's like November, and you're like, I hardly ever touch it. Why do I have to get this thing? So even stuff like this, you're gonna want to use your calculator for it because it's, you know, you could do it. You could do it by hand, but at that point it becomes quality control. You're taking a test. I mean, we all write some weird stuff down on tests. Yeah, I got the right answer in my head, but for whatever reason, that's not what ended up on the paper, and I don't know why. You know, so the calculator can kind of help remind us what should go down. Now, the mode is the most frequent value in the data set. It can also be more than one or none. All right, so you could have no mode. You could have exactly one number that is the mode, or you could have many modes. Right, but it's whatever occurs most frequently. So what number occurs most frequently in A? 7. So the mode is 7. These two guys. What about B? None. So we'll write none, or you could do no solution. All right. Important distinction. If you write 0, you're telling me what? The number 0 is the most common number. So that's not true, right? Little discussion on maybe how people write some things, depending on where you're from. Some people natively write zeros with a little cross through it. We're going to want to try to break that habit, or at least when you write the 0 with the little strike through, keep that strike through contained to the 0. Because in math, this means no solution. And this is dangerously close to looking like no solution. All right? So on a test, you don't want to take that chance. If you're really in doubt, you want to write the number 0 and you're afraid it's going to look like no solution, write the word 0. Don't take any chances. All right? Don't write the symbol for no solution. Write no solution. Write none. You know, don't take any chances. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that I'm going to strenuously argue with you. After a test, you come back and you say, I swear, look at everywhere I wrote on the test. That's how I write my zeros. I'll be like, all right, I'll give you a point back. I'm not gonna argue with that because it doesn't matter too much to me. And if there's a reasonable explanation behind it, I'll be like, oh, of course, now I see it. But to avoid even having the conversation in the first place, just try to keep that in mind. How's about C? 1 and 3. Those are the numbers that occur most frequently. They're tied with each other. And the last one? 3. That's the only way I could even conceivably come up with any kind of thing that remotely looks like a trick question. Because people with a conceptual misunderstanding will think that repeated numbers are mode. Right? So if a number repeats, it's a mode. That's what might end up becoming your definition, and that's incorrect. Just because it repeats does not mean that it's a mode. It has to be the most repetitive one. Right? So if that 4 occurred 4 times, then the 3 of that is not the mode. The 4 would be. Right? Now, if the 3 only occurred 2 times, and then the 4 occurred 2 times. So imagine this last 3 here was a 4. Then everything occurs equally frequently, right? So no mode. Even though you have repeated numbers, you would have no mode. Right? So slight little subtleties there that could be a source of a trick question. I don't intentionally put trick questions on tests, but sometimes people get tricked nonetheless, and that's, I don't go for it, but that's what it is. The range. The difference between the highest and lowest values in a data set. Pretty straightforward. So in the example, the range, difference again means subtraction. So 17 minus 1, 16. Put a little highlight action on mid-range. I'm emphasizing that one. So emphasize that in your own way. Put a star, circle it, whatever. It always ends up on the test, and a good 30% of the class always gets this question wrong because it's a very small topic. It's not even, it doesn't even warrant the term topic. It's like a subset of a subset of a topic. It's so minor. It's such a minor detail that people gloss over. Everybody will remember what the word range means because it's kind of a word that sort of defines itself. You can think about it in real life. If you had to think about a data set and take what your normal understanding of the word range is and apply it to a data set, you could figure out that it has to do something with the length of the data set or the breadth of the data set, depending on how you think about it. So then maybe you don't study the concept of a mid-range and you say, well, I know what a range is, mid-range. Well, mid usually means half, so we just chop this bad boy in half and call it a day. 8, wrong answer. Okay, that sucks. -1 on the test. -1's not going to kill you, but -1 for this question, and that one, and that one, and that one, and that one, and it starts to add up. Right? Mid-range is the average of the highest and lowest values. So it's the midpoint of the data set. So it's basically related to range in name only. Because the process for coming up with the mid-range doesn't really have anything to do with the process for coming up with the range. So the mid-range (17 plus 1 over 2 equals 9). All right. So what do we got here? Unit test 1 is tentatively scheduled for October 6th. I'm a big fan of the calendar feature on the phone. Maybe October 6th, you just set a little alert. You hit the old plus sign. Just type in the word mid-range. 8:30 a.m. Alert at time of event. 8:30 will give you enough, because I'll start the test at 9. So 8:30 will give you enough time to look it up. You're like, oh yeah, that's something I should refresh my memory on. The calendar function is pretty. I kind of live off of that. That's my way of doing things. And emailing myself. That's because that's the only way I can stay organized. If I was born in a century prior to anything even close to the 21st century, I would have been fired from every job. I would have failed out of school. Like organization was not my strength, but people of like mindset started taking over the world in terms of technology, and they started inventing stuff that makes people like me be successful. So, and that's one of them. If that's a piece of advice that helps you, then by all means take it, and then tell other people that it was your idea. Okay. All right, so that was page 3.